My grandmother and great-grandmother were good with plants. They loved gardening, and the gardens loved them. My mother, too, got that gift, her house filled with houseplants, many of them older than me. Some of them, ones that belonged to my great-grandmother first, might be older than her. I always wanted to be able to garden, to be surrounded by plants and flowers and the birds and butterflies that loved them, but that green thumb didn't come naturally to me. For a long time, I figured my inability to grow stuff would keep me from having any houseplants. I went to the botanical garden's yearly houseplant sale and asked for the easiest plant they had. They showed me a golden pothos, and I bought 2 baby plants. As I walked out, an old lady nodded at the pot in my hands and said, "You can't kill those even if you try." Never one to balk at a challenge, I took them home, and in my nurturing care, one of them promptly died. The other survived though, and after it put on a 4th new leaf, I promised myself that if I could keep it alive for 1 full year, I would allow myself to try the one plant I wanted more than anything. That plant was a monstera, and after my golden pothos survived a full 12 months, I brought one home after many years of wanting that houseplant. Immediately, it began to die. I read every guide, every houseplant subreddit, and combed through social media for tips. I did everything right, and no matter what I tried, it continued to lose leaves. I shared this distress with a dear friend who mentioned it to her mother. "Well," her mother said, "how is she doing? Is she okay?" I didn't know why she would ask. Monsteras are a soul plant, her mom explained. The only way for the plant to thrive is if you're thriving too. After the last leaf began to die, I realized the best thing I could do for the plant was put it outside and leave it alone. It sat on my back patio, completely ignored for the entirety of last spring. It didn't get any worse, but it didn't get better either. It had 1/4 of one leaf left, and that was it. So I left it alone and went on with everything else I had to do. I struggled to find inspiration to work on my creative projects. I went to doctor appointments to try and get answers. I kept editing and sharing videos that I'd filmed in bulk in January and pretended I spent all year working on those crafts. And the more I worked on things I was supposed to love, the more burned out I felt. At the end of spring, I saw a new doctor, and she suggested allergy medication might address a lot of the issues I was having. I figured we'd give it a try, and while I didn't see any changes right away, I noticed I started having a little more energy. And I didn't have any more creative energy, but I did sleep a little better. And one day I looked at my monstera on the patio, and I noticed it had put on some new leaves. It didn't seem like it had anything to do with anything I'd done. I hadn't even watered the plant in 2 months. I was too busy with other things. It grew a few leaves, then it stopped. Around that time, my creative burnout had gotten worse. I was out of videos to post, and it got harder to find things to share. I lacked inspiration, I was overwhelmed with appointments, and a book release I was really excited about sort of flopped. It kind of felt like summer was a whole season of sitting in stasis, waiting for solutions for problems that didn't seem to get better no matter what I tried. I kept trying things, but nothing helped. Eventually, the CT scans I was waiting for came back clear, and my cardiologist told me I could officially go back to normal. The hypermobility disorder that lets my fingers bend in ways fingers are definitely not supposed to go posed no discernible risk to my heart, and while it would need to be monitored for the rest of my life, I could finally come off the extreme rest order I'd been on for 1.5 years. Then, for no reason in particular, I told my husband the problem was my car needed new carpet. I cut it open and discovered the padding beneath the carpet was full of black mold. There had been one weather incident where the interior got wet, but I had done such a thorough job of drying it that I never imagined such a thing could happen. In August or September, we tore it all out, treated the whole car, and installed a new carpet. Suddenly, the allergy medicine started making a difference. My arrhythmia started getting better, and I wasn't so short of breath. But being on a rest order for so long meant I'd lost a lot of strength and stamina, so I have a long way to climb to get back to a general state of physical well-being. Like so many other people, I sat down at the beginning of the year with a calendar and my planner and worked out my goals for the year, and realized the biggest one would be making the time for daily exercise and strength training to get my health back to where it needs to be. But I was already so busy. On top of everything I was already doing, my daughter changed schools this year, and the new one is farther away and lets out an hour earlier, so I have less time available. Then I'd have to make sure to schedule an hour for improving my health every day, and suddenly I only had 3 hours a day in which I could do any kind of personal project work, which means writing books and working on my dolls. 3 hours is about what it takes for me to get my daily word count goals in my writing. So when am I supposed to do anything else? And how could I keep sharing my doll projects with so little time? I didn't want to give it up, especially since YouTube is the main way I connect with the doll hobby community. But it was also super hard to get anything done while feeling so burned out. Then, at some point, I realized part of the problem was I had accidentally compartmentalized my projects so strictly that I forgot one really important thing: the name I picked. You see, when I decided I wanted to start a channel to share my doll customization projects with family and friends, most of whom live really far away from me, I thought long and hard about what I was going to name this channel. There's a reason it's Lomi's Playground and not Lomi's Dolls, and the main reason was I wanted to ensure I gave myself room to grow. In the midst of everything, I'd somehow forgotten that really important decision. I'd narrowed my focus so much that it stripped a lot of fun out of the experience and left me feeling stuck when I ran out of new things to share. That definitely didn't help with the burnout, and it was funny because it led me to do something I always swore I wouldn't do for the same reason I chose the channel name I did. For the first time ever, I looked at my channel's analytics. A long time ago, I told myself I'd never do that because I didn't want to get stuck chasing views instead of chasing fun. I didn't want to pursue what was popular, because I never wanted this channel to be a career, but a creative outlet. I'd seen so many other people burn themselves out by chasing what paid instead of what brought them joy, and I didn't want to do that. But I also worked myself into a corner by trying to keep focused on one narrow subject, and everything stagnated. Not just my hobby and my creativity in general, but my channel too. I knew I wanted to expand, finally taking advantage of the room I left for that exact thing when I named my channel, both to breathe new life into my creativity and to bring more energy into the creativity I was sharing. But I didn't know how I could do that when I'd built such a specific audience, and I thought maybe the best thing I could do was ensure I was still sharing the type of narrow category content people first joined me for. I don't know what I expected, but when I looked at my channel analytics, it was nothing like what I anticipated. My top 5 videos ever were all in wildly different categories. One was a face-up, one was pattern drafting, one was about airbrush cleaning and reassembly, one was a basic sewing tutorial, and one was about working with doll eyes. The farther I went down the list, the more confused I got because it stayed all over the place like that. People loved vague. They loved different. So by trying to deliver really focused and clear doll content and tutorials, I'd had fun for a while, but backed myself into a corner while also neglecting the fact that really people were here for a wide variety of creative subjects, as long as they felt accessible. I also realized that some of the things I shared that people connected with most were those where I spoke about specific challenges or my own personal struggles, which highlighted something I'd always resisted, and that was having my content be more about me and my creative journey than the projects I was sharing. I've always known that what leads a lot of other creators to success and finding people to connect with is making themselves a prevalent part of their work, that their channels are largely them-centric instead of project or tutorial-centric like I've done. But I'll confess that sharing that kind of content is hard for me because it means moving outside a comfort zone. When all I share is what I've done or how, I don't have to be in the spotlight. And if I'm being honest, I'm really shy, and that's a big reason I've always hated being present and visible in my videos. It's easier to share when it feels like people aren't looking at me, but at the same time, that robs me of the personal connections I've always looked for in sharing my projects too. So maybe it's time to change that? I spent a lot of time discussing my findings with friends, and also discussing the ways I wanted to branch out. I want to do more doll things. not just customizing my ball-jointed dolls, but sharing small, day-to-day experiences that happen when you're someone with doll collecting and customization as a hobby. Things like finding doll-scale props in thrift stores, or trying to make something new in miniature after you see it in human size. I also want to share more than just my ball-jointed dolls. I've shared a couple custom Nendoroids, but I've wanted to make more of those. And I want to spend more time talking about the characters and stories that led me to creating in the first place. I want to share more of how my hobby enriches my writing, and more about what goes into the creation of those stories from a characters and world-building perspective than a craft and business-related perspective, which is what my writing vlog channel is focused on. There are so many things that happen outside of dolls that I want to share that are still connected to my creativity. Did I even mention here that I won a second literary award in March? It was for the third book in Spectrum Legacy, the epic fantasy series I'm writing that my little Nendoroid doll characters are from. And then, after all my years of sewing and designing doll clothes, would you believe I've never sewn a single piece of clothing for myself? So where am I going with this? I guess it's mostly about setting goals and establishing room for change. I've put my health up at the top of the priority list, but I know my shortcomings, so I'm trying to work around my personal weaknesses and find ways to make prioritizing myself fun. For example, my doctor thought it was a great idea if I used things like DDR to help me get back in shape. And it's fun, but I've gone from someone who could play DDR for 2 or 3 hours straight to someone who can barely get through a set in light mode. So there's some work to be done. I also know I have a hard time putting my needs above the needs of others, so in order to trick myself, I recently got the buttons fixed on my old gamified pedometer so that my daily activity is now tied to keeping Pikachu happy. Because if you don't log a certain number of steps per day, he gets mad and you lose friendship points. The step counter inside is partially worn out and couldn't be fixed, which means it only counts half the steps it should, which means I have to work harder to meet Pikachu's friendship needs. Since I'm better at seeing to the needs of others than seeing to my own needs, it helps. It might be silly, but it's not stupid if it works. I'm also going to keep prioritizing writing because it's what led me to the doll hobby in the first place. And that will probably change the sort of doll content I ultimately share. I'll still be sharing tutorials, of course. I have a whole batch I still owe to go along with patterns I've shared that I didn't have time to make videos for. But while my analytics told me people really enjoy seeing a doll's full customization process in one video, that would limit me to maybe 2 videos a year right now, and that's just not fun. So while I'll be sharing the big projects, possibly in an all-in-one format, those will be more rare, and most of what I share from a week-to-week basis will be casual updates on what I'm working on at any given time. There will likely be more about my doll characters and more about their stories, and maybe more of a creative slice of life showing how these dolls and their projects fit in during this particular stage of my life. I know that won't be everyone's cup of tea, and that's alright. Some people are only here for tutorials and will be sad to see fewer posted. Others want things I'll never make again, just because it's not something that can be done twice. For example, once you show how to draw a pattern for a shirt, that's it, and that success or reception can never be repeated, because it's not something you can add fresh new information to by remaking the tutorial over and over again. Similarly, there are only so many guides on how to sew a t-shirt someone can make. YouTube tells me my channel is 9 years old now, and after almost a decade I've pretty much covered all the basics. The only one I can even think of that I haven't done a video on is restringing a doll, or maybe sueding, so I'll put those on the list of things to talk about at some point. But if you can think of any other basics you'd like to see me cover though, by all means leave me a comment, because I still want to be helpful. I think that's something I'll always want to be. Recently I decided I wanted to try baking some pretty cakes or cupcakes. When I was young, my mom made wedding cakes, and I always loved watching her do it. She let me practice with the leftover decorator icing, and I remember it being a lot of fun. I mentioned it to her, and for Christmas she got me everything I needed to try decorating cakes. It was funny, because while I was excited to be able to try and do something new for my upcoming birthday cake, I also immediately found myself delighted by how many of the decorating tips in the kit were tiny enough to let me make cakes in doll size too. I guess by this point, that hobby is so firmly integrated into my everyday life that it'll never be left behind. But I've been on the doll merry-go-round for a while, and I'm ready to explore other things on the playground too. That's my other big goal for this year, and I hope you'll enjoy seeing some other aspects of life with dolls as we move forward. After I spoke with my friends about expanding what I do with my channel and dipping my toes into content that dealt more with just living a creative life with hobbies like mine, I felt a lot better. We talked about how my channel would probably shrink, but I'd be happier and more fulfilled, and it would be easier to fit into my new, very limited schedule while still making sure I had time to improve my health and write my books. When we were done talking, I went to water the plants that are overwintering in my bathroom. I couldn't reach one well after my husband moved it to the windowsill, so I had to move a few plants to get to it. When I did, I noticed my monstera had its first new leaf in months. It's very small compared to the rest, but it's there, and it's growing. So maybe my friend's mom is right.